Welcome back to Stories in AI. Today, I speak with Beena Ammanath. Beena is the Executive Director for Deloitte's AI Institute and also leads Trustworthy AI for Deloitte. Beena is an award-winning senior executive with extensive global experience in AI and digital transformation journeys spanning across e-commerce, finance, marketing, telecom, retail, software, product, services, and industrial domains with companies like HP Enterprise, GE, Thomson Reuters, British Telecom, Bank of America, E-Trade, and a number of Silicon Valley startups. She's also the founder of a nonprofit called Humans for AI. A well-recognized thought leader in the space, she also serves on the board of Cal Poly College of Engineering and has been the board member and advisor for several startups. Beena thrives on envisioning and architecting how data, artificial intelligence, and technology in general can make our world better and easier place for all humans. I had a great conversation and we touched upon many interesting topics from the state of the market in AI, the spread of value creation with AI across multiple industries, how organizations that are leading the charge with AI and technology, what do they do to actually further their journeys in AI? What are the best practices that you can learn from them? We talked about ethics and trust with respect to AI, and we talked about expanding the human opportunity pool with technologies like AI. I had a fascinating time having a great conversation with Beena, and I hope you enjoyed too. Beena, welcome to Stories in AI. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Ganesh. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. It's sunny Austin, although I must say it's beginning to feel like Seattle this year with all the rain we're getting. You guys are having a heat wave too, right? You're feeling more like
Yes,
Texas?
yes, it is. It was hot, but this week is surprisingly cold again. I actually had to pull out sweater. So I was just thinking the other day something to do with climate change and how the seasons have evolved, like evolving right in front of our eyes.
Right in front of our eyes, much sooner than we all expected it to be, right? So I was supposed to, ironically enough, I was supposed to record a climate technologist this morning, and she lives in Netherlands, and she texted me this morning saying, hey, there is a lot of flooding. Over 100 people are missing or dead because of the Benelux region is undergoing some unprecedented flooding. So we had to move that recording and schedule to another time. But this is unfolding much faster than we all expected, and I'm hoping that some point all we technologists can get together, put AI to work harder to solve these problems, right? And so thanks again for taking the time. Thank you for being here today. I know you have a very busy schedule, and I'm going to get right to it if you're okay.
Great. Let's do it.
Okay, so Beena, tell us your personal story. Let's start with that. Tell us how and why you got into AI.
So, my personal journey, I would say, is a little bit too common. So I studied computer science for my bachelor's and master's. So both undergrad and grad is in computer science. And this was way back in the early 90s. And where, AI was one of the subjects we studied, but it was all in theory. We certainly didn't have access to the compute power or data. Right? It was, I can't believe in my own lifetime I'm seeing this technology coming real. So when I started my career, it was more as a programmer, as a software developer, software engineer. But I always anchored myself on data. And I'll tell you, Ganesh, I certainly didn't plan it out that way. But, I kind of have experience across different industries. Right. I've worked in financial services with banks and trading companies. I've worked in industrial companies, right, from aviation to power and healthcare, and also in high-tech companies, right? I kept myself anchored in data. So I had the traditional career of starting from database developer to DBA to managing data teams. And then came the phase of BI and data warehousing. So ran the BI team at E-Trade. And then, as AI started becoming real, as machine learning started taking its own shape and becoming, driving real business value, It was a natural evolution into how do we use big data, how can we get insights from it and drive business value. And that's how I got into AI. And I feel that I've been so fortunate that I saw this technology taking shape right in front of my eyes and have been part of that journey. I feel grateful that even though I didn't plan my career this way, it's a career mosaic where I have
Yeah.
experience across all these different industries, which gives me a very unique perspective on how AI is impacting different industries. And now with my role at Deloitte, I get, front view seat into how this AI is shaping different industries and really look ahead into the future, not only from the value creation, but also how could this go wrong and how do we actually make it successful for everybody and address some of the challenges that's core to humanity's survival. Just like you were saying earlier, how do we get AI to work to solve for climate change?
It's fascinating. I mean, you and I can't wait to dig into all of that. But you still had the foresight to actually pretty much bet your career on data, right? In terms of saying, look, computation and data are so fundamental, and it's going to evolve over time, over decades, and hundreds of years, centuries, if you will. And having and building that foundation is pretty amazing. So you did have the foresight to do that. So let's start with, tell us a little bit about your role at Deloitte and as the executive director for the AI Institute. What does the institute do? Just give us a little brief, Vince, and also color on a little bit of color on what your typical day is like.
Oh, yeah. There is no typical day, Ganesh. I can tell you that. The only typical part of it is sitting on Zoom calls and doing great, amazing, interesting work. So, what I do at Deloitte AI Institute, really, the Deloitte AI Institute was set up with the vision of something that I struggled with when I was leading AI at these large companies, right? The AI ecosystem is very robust. It's,
Hmm.
continuously evolving, right? It's not, the research phase is not yet over while the technology is already being used in real world. And there are startups, there are mature AI players, there are regulations and policies coming into play. There is so much happening in the AI space. And what we're doing with the AI Institute is to really connect across all these different dimensions of AI, but from an applied AI lens. Meaning that, how can how are, say, financial services companies using AI? What are the top applications? What are the best practices? What are the risks that they're facing? So, being able to look at AI from a very applied perspective is what we do with Deloitte AI Institute. We also look at more of the fuzzy areas around ethics and how do you get more diversity and inclusion in AI. So there's a lot of different factors that go into succeeding and with scaling AI in enterprises. And Deloitte AI Institute is positioned to become that stop to get all the information you need from an applied AI lens. I also focus on our AI ethics perspective because, as
Hmm.
I said, that's been at the forefront of what I've been thinking of in the past few years. Is really the risks involved with AI. And maybe Ganesh, I'll give you this perspective, on how I think about where we are with AI today, right? If you think about where we are with AI, there are three parallel streams, so to speak. One is the core AI research, right? Whether
Hmm.
it's the next wave of deep learning or neural net, facial recognition, these technologies are still being researched and still being developed in academia or research groups. That's one stream that's accelerating at its pace. Then there's a second stream where this technology, which is still being developed, is being used in the real world because you can see business value that you can get even from this not so fully mature technology. So there is value that companies are getting today by using a technology that's still being developed. That's the second stream. And then the
Hmm.
third stream is really, the second stream focuses on value, but what are the negative implications, right? Where things like ethics and policy and regulations come into play, right? Whether it's the impact to individual's health or challenges with manipulating data, right? There is a third stream which is really looking at what are the negative impacts of this technology, which is accelerating at its own pace. So if you
Mm-hmm.
think about it at this high level, you know, the crude analogy that I give is like we're still developing the car engine. It is still in development. We're still fine tuning it, and we've already put an auto body around it and are driving that car because it is still getting us faster from point A to point B. But in the third stream, we don't have the speed limits defined. We don't have the road structured to speed up with this technology. So each one of this is still evolving, and so for me it's just fascinating to see how it's shaping out, and how do we really not only talk about value creation with the technology, but what are the ways it could go wrong and put in the guardrails ahead of time. So that's the focus around AI ethics and trustworthy AI, which is an area I focus on as well at Deloitte. So
That's
what
amazing.
so,
Go ahead.
a typical day goes right from whether it is talking to AI startups or looking at what's out going on in AI research and how it's applicable in the real world, to looking at, the ethical aspects on, what kind of teams do we need? What does an ethicist role look like? Right? It's a really an interesting time to be in a role like this, where I get this preview across all the industries and be part of this rich AI ecosystem.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, I'm jealous, and like you said, it just, if you really think about it, the whole aspect that it's such a dynamic environment with all these things, the
Mhm.
three very well defined streams of work happening. Research, where you're trying to create new ways of doing things, and then there is the practical or the applied AI space, wherein you're trying to generate value out of it, and then you always have to start thinking about the risks and the impact of what you're doing in the broader spectrum. In many ways, it's like the whole notion of machine learning itself, right? Wherein you have, it's never done. You can't really, like in traditional
Yeah.
software, you build a product and throw out. In machine learning, it's an iterative science, and it's fascinating that you say that, like, even the industry itself is, in effect, a reflection of what kind of science we're actually dealing with here, right? So, pretty fascinating, and thanks for laying that out and where AI is today. So let me go a little bit deeper on that and ask you, what is real in AI, what is hype, and what is science fiction today? So you
Yeah.
go a level deeper.
Yes. So, look, AI is driving real value in businesses, but it is nowhere close to where it is taking over entire businesses and running on its own,
True.
right? So we do this annual survey, and we're actually in the midst of our fourth survey right now, where we are looking at state of AI, and we saw companies are using AI, and they fall in three different categories. The first category is really where they're just beginning to think about AI, and how does it fit in, doing a few POCs, and very early in their journey. And then the last one is where companies have AI embedded in, have a number of AI solutions in production, and are more on that mature side. But the largest group is in the middle, where they are still doing POCs and they have a few AI solutions in production. What we're seeing, Ganesh, is really, where the real world is. You're seeing the narrow applications of AI, right? Where you
Mhm.
can do basic automation, using leveraging machine learning and AI, whether it is to developing a chatbot to drive better customer engagement, right? It is just fitting into existing processes. What is not real is AGI or the hype around robots taking over the world. I think we are still very far from it. And the reason I say it, I honestly don't think that if you look at that first stream where research is happening, I don't think we have the models or the technology ready today to do any kind of artificial general intelligence, right? And an example that I give, which is more, more real world, right? Like you and I talking here today, or if it's two people talking today, there is some AI enabling us to do this conversation, which could do potentially real time translation, but that's about it. It does a very narrow, specific job. So anything within an organization which can be done with less than 30 seconds of your brain power will be automated and is automated today. And we are looking at where, how do you expand out from that 30-second brain power to, how do you automate more and more of the 5-minute work, right? So that's the best way that I would describe where we are with AI today.
No, it's fascinating. Like you're so right. I think it's a chicken and egg problem, or it's like you had Hollywood pretty much defining the narrative for AI in the industry, which helped two things, right? One, it is spreading fear on one end, and people are thinking, Skynet and robots taking over kind of creates that doomsday scenario in people's minds when they think of AI. But on the other hand, it also popularized and made it cool to actually for scientists and researchers to get more and into AI and say, how do I really apply this technology to create a digital human, right? Or, the AGI conversation, it's the moonshot of AI, right? The true
Yes.
artificial general intelligence. And just like the moonshot, I mean, you can't go to the moon to do grocery shopping, but the fact that you actually went to the moon created a wave of innovation that allowed so many other practical applications across multiple industries, right? I mean, that's the power of AGI or the focus on AGI. So, but you're exactly what I'm hearing and I'm seeing too, right? Which is the level of knowledge work that can be automated is still fairly limited and it's very narrow, right? And it's the goal is we actually improve that and move that in the notion of how do you augment the human being so you make their life a lot more richer, right? You make it more fulfilling for them to do the things they love and that's more innately human and so forth. Fascinating to get your perspective on this. So on the industry impacts as well, right? What industry is actually seeing more impact versus the other?
Yeah.
In AI in general, we do see that the large and the big tech organizations are obviously getting lopsided benefits. They started first, they could hire more people, they have more data. But the other industries are kind of catching up. Give us a color of that. Where do you see across the industry what's working? Where is it adopted more versus not?
Yeah, I think where we are seeing most traction, and naturally so, is where, traditionally there has been a lot of data already captured, right? So, so banking, financial industries, and
Mhm.
also, life sciences and healthcare, more on the pharma side, where there has been a need for data and it was captured, it was structured, it was ready for AI to become real. Where we're not seeing as much traction is obviously, say manufacturing companies or industrial companies, where there was no need to capture that data, right? There was no incentive to capture that data beyond just for transactional purposes, right? I'll give you an example from my own experience. What I've seen is, say, for an industry like aviation, right? When we started looking at doing predictive maintenance on jet engines, you start looking at the engine data, and it is, just what's on that black box, really small amount of data. And it was, at that time, for engines manufactured a few decades ago, it was like 30 to 40 sensors captured during 3 points in any flight, right? Once during takeoff, once during launch, and once during landing, right? That,
Yeah.
that was it. And once, AI started becoming real and we started seeing, you have to go back to the design to embed additional sensors in the engine to capture the data that's needed for AI. So, I think we are seeing where there hasn't been traditionally a data need. They are obviously lagging a little bit, but they play catch up. There are new engines coming up in this specific case. And also the need to tie in with existing legacy data sets, right? You know as well as I do that, AI is not just about big data. You need that small data sets, right, for the
Yep.
predictive maintenance of an engine. You need those service records, and service records, when you start looking at it, they exist, but it is handwritten on a piece of paper, which is how it's always been done, right? So it's not so much about AI at that point, it's about data cleansing, getting all those service records digitized, which is a whole exercise on its own. And I think we get lost a little bit sometimes on just focusing on big data. But when you look at this traditional industries, there is a there's a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of foundational work that needs to be done. And that's what we are seeing happening in the real world as well, right? When you look at something like service records, you realize, it's about changing the way the technician does the work or captures information. So that means you need to, digitize the entire process and operations. It's not just about even digitizing existing records, but how do you get future records, and what additional data points do you need to capture from the service record that was not there in the earlier form. So there's a lot. I think, Ganesh, the best way to think about it is industries that have existed, say, 25, 30 years before, versus industries that came into existence in the past 25, 30 years, which is primarily where big tech falls in, right? But there are, industries that have existed for centuries and decades before that, which needs a lot of foundational data work to be done to make AI successful.
Got it. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Um, I don't know whether you saw my son walked in, sneaked through, and then went back out. But I'll have to cut this little portion. But thank you for thank you for that perspective. I'm back on. So no, thank you for that perspective, Veena. I think that's amazing. It's almost to say that industries, as you said, you summed it up very well. The newer industries, which started with the foundation of collecting and a data first approach, are obviously adopting or being in a position to adopt AI and technologies to power a lot of their transformational journeys. And then the traditional historic industries who didn't really have the incentive to collect or look at data before are the ones who are the laggards here. That also says there's a lot of potential energy latent in there that you can actually leverage. And those are industries that will really, when you move from just a digital landscape to bridging digital and physical worlds together, now you unlock a whole bunch of value out in the open. So fascinating. Thank you for that perspective. One of the things I've been really inspired by the work you do is the highlighting the women and the underrepresented minorities efforts and contributions in AI, including your Humans for AI work and the Deloitte Institute's report on women in AI. Tell us two things. One is, why is there a diversity problem in AI? And two, what is the impact of not doing anything about it?
Yeah, there is a diversity problem in general in tech and in STEM, and at every level, right? It's not just as when you're getting started in your career, but right up to the boardroom. It's a well-established fact that there's a diversity problem, and I've always been a supporter and trying to get more women and underrepresented minorities to be part of technology and STEM. But once AI started becoming real, Ganesh, and I was setting up my first data science team, and I distinctly remember, I was really, I was in that phase of hiring data scientists and data engineers, and I really struggled to find women, and especially people of color. It tended to be a very homogenous group, and sometimes, even though I was the leader, I was the only woman at the table. I got to a point where I realized that with broader tech it's a problem, but with AI there is more urgency around getting more diversity into AI. And the reason being that we hear a lot about bias in AI, about fairness and ethics. The best way to solve for it is to have a diverse AI team, right? The challenge is we all are biased, but that's what makes humans beautiful as well. Like if you and I were exactly the same and behaved exactly the same, that would make us really boring. But it's also the human, characteristic, right? It's based on our prior experiences, our educational background, cultural background. There is so much that we makes us individualistic, right? But we don't want those biases to go into the AI systems that we build. No matter how great I think you are, I don't think all your biases should be encoded and scaled out to all of humanity, right? And vice versa. So, I think the best way to solve for it is by bringing diversity of thought. It just happens our gender diversity is the largest gap right now, right? Women tend to be the largest minority group. And so let's start with getting the gender diversity right in AI. But the reason for starting Humans for AI was I was really looking at, what were the organizations focused on getting more diversity into AI. And so that was one data point. The other one I realized is, AI actually provides us a huge opportunity to get more diversity into AI because unlike traditional software, you don't need to be a programmer. Not everybody in a data science team needs to have a PhD in machine learning or AI. You still need designers, you need testers, you need domain experts, right? And that's where I think the biggest opportunity we have is, okay, the data scientists themselves can be a homogeneous group, but let's surround them with diversity by making sure that the subject matter experts, the product managers, project managers, designers are as diverse as possible. And in that way, we'll have a robust, diverse AI team. And that's what prompted me to start Humans for AI when I realized that there was actually an opportunity we could solve for it, and not everybody needed to have that deep technical knowledge to be part of an AI team. So what Humans for AI does is we are raising awareness, but we also provide basic AI literacy by partnering with other nonprofits who are focused on providing education to URMs and women's groups. And in that way, we can get AI in front of people who otherwise would not. I would love to share a story, for
Please.
a group that we touched recently, Ganesh, which actually made got me goosebumps, right? So this was we started an alliance with UC Berkeley over here, and it is really about UC Berkeley providing basic AI literacy training to cohorts of women and URMs. And
Hmm.
we were able to partner with an organization that finds and supports human trafficking victims. And most human trafficking victims are victims when they are in middle and high school. And once they're rescued, this organization actually provides them the ability to complete high school and get to college. with We got this cohort to come in and learn about AI because they definitely use AI, and they felt so empowered after that 2 day session because nobody looks at these groups of people who are going to get left behind, right? And to have them sit through these sessions and understand how AI is being used in companies and get that basic understanding of what does machine learning mean, what is NLP, being able to read a news article about AI and understand it, that was very empowering. So I think what we want to do is really make sure that nobody gets left behind in the AI journey. Whether you're part of the AI team or not, even as a consumer, you should be very well educated on what is AI's capabilities. It should not be just people like you and me who have that privilege to be at the forefront with this. It should be everybody. So it kind of evolved into solving for a diversity problem, but really making sure nobody gets left behind.
That's such a beautiful story. Thanks for sharing that, Bina. And it's fascinating, right? The true goal for all of us share this common goal with AI, which is how do you really use AI as a human augmentor than to replace human,
Mm,
right? And it's like my favorite analogy is I don't want Terminators. I want Iron Man, right? Where I am Tony Stark and I put on an iron armor, which is powered by AI and robotics, and I just become a superhuman, right? And to
yeah.
really share that story where the groups that are potentially left behind, even given a glimpse of this powerful technology and how it can empower everybody and inspiring them to take action. I'm hoping a lot of them will get into data science or get into working in AI in this process and stuff too. That's such a beautiful story you shared. And on top of that, I think AI also provides you that opportunity because AI is unlike other technologies. It is a team sport. You need
Yes.
data, algorithms, design. There are so many elements that needs to come together. So unlike Java development, this now is providing you an opportunity to bring a larger group of people together.
Right,
Thank
and the biggest need is in the that where you need subject matter experts, whether it is data tagging, right,
you.
labeling that needs to be done for AI, or there is only so much just a pure technical data science team can do in using AI for healthcare products or for education. If you're looking at building an AI product for education, as data scientists, we can barely scratch the surface. We can automate the small things, but you need an educator involved to really grow AI as well. To think about the next AI product, you need an educator involved. It cannot be done without the educator. So, can we make that educator to be as diverse? So, that's the
No, it's
opportunity.
fascinating. No, it's a huge opportunity, and I've been, just a digression. I've been thinking about this exact problem of, when we talk about human centered AI and stuff. It's what is becoming increasingly clear is across data, algorithms, software infrastructure, and subject matter expertise. The subject matter expertise is becoming more and more critical in this process, right? And to
Yes.
truly scale the value of AI, that's where you need to focus on, and that's available in abundance. And that's the amazing opportunity in front of us.
Yeah.
No, fascinating. Um, you touched a little bit upon trust and ethics in AI, right? And
Yeah.
explore that a little bit for me, right? What is ethics in AI? Is it my ethics? Is it your ethics? Is it, one common code of ethics? I
Yeah.
mean, what is ethics in AI?
Yeah, so I tend to put it in that third stream, right, of the negative consequences of AI, right? And right now we call it the ethics, and there's policies and regulations. But for me, ethics is different based on the industry, and even
Hmm.
within an industry, based on the sector or the use case, right? So think about like life sciences and healthcare as a whole, right? And we when we talk about ethics, a lot of literature that you see out there very quickly and go very fast, rapidly goes down this path of bias and fairness. But the reality is that if you are a manufacturing plant or if you're an industrial company, where you don't have that direct contact with a consumer,
Hmm.
fairness and bias may not be as important as something as reliability of the algorithms or the security of the algorithms. Excuse me. So I think ethics is a very crucial discussion, but it also has to be more nuanced. I've certainly been part of a number of sessions talking about it, and we've developed a framework here at Deloitte that we are working on operationalizing it.
Hmm.
Excuse me.
Don't worry about it. Take your time. Take a sip of water.
I was trying to keep going. Okay, I'm going to repeat the last sentence.
Please.
Um, so ethics has to be more nuanced than just fairness and bias. I think there are different dimensions to it, right? From who is accountable for an AI system if it goes wrong? Who, is it reliable? Like you briefly touched on, the AI solution that you develop and deploy, once it's out in the world, it's still learning and evolving, right? That's an implication. Is there an implication to human health? That needs to be addressed, the privacy aspect. So there are different dimensions to the discussion on ethics. And what I think is also it needs to be solved not at the technology level, right? At the highest level, any company needs to define what does ethics mean for the company, because it cannot be at a human level, because we all have different definitions of what does ethics mean for us, right? But
Hmm.
as an organization, it's important to define upfront what is technology ethics, AI ethics principles for the organization, And then it needs to be looked at from a technology perspective, absolutely, on how do you put in the guardrails within the technology, embed it within the technology, so that your chatbot doesn't go racist, for example, right?
Sure.
Then there is the process aspect to it, where you are actually putting in control mechanisms, whether it's into your existing processes or new process, right? For example, we've all done this, project management and agile, methodology, where we focus on, say, we are building a new AI solution. What's the ROI in 1 year, 5 years? You define that upfront, right? What's the value that you can get? The
Right.
process change could be as simple as, do a checkpoint on, have the entire team think through what are the ways this could go wrong. Proactively add in a simple step and have that discussion on, what are the ways this could go wrong, and address it during your engineering process, right? So that's the process and governance aspect of it. And then there's the third one is the people, right? We hear a lot about getting in an ethicist or an AI ethics officer, but really ethics should be everybody's job. So, how do you provide through trainings, through learning and development, how do you make sure that everybody in the company understands what does AI ethics mean for us, and how do you detect it? How do you make somebody aware? And here's the reason why it should be beyond the engineering department, Ganesh. The reason is that, there might be somebody in your supporting function, in your CFO group, an accountant, who is today evaluating AI vendors, who have, an AI vendor who has an accounting software solution, right? That person needs to understand what should they be looking at from an ethics perspective in that software evaluation, not just about the functionality of it, right? But how has the software been developed, how, from a privacy perspective, right? To understand, having that basic understanding is important. So education should be a big part of this solution for AI ethics.
No, it's you're laying out a very, I would say, comprehensive and practical roadmap, right? There's like even in the earlier conversation when we were talking about biases and things with underrepresented folks within the AI development and the operational team, there's a lot of uh, pointing fingers at data. The data is not right, or the data has bias in it, and stuff like that. But it's more than just one thing. It's the entire ecosystem of elements that need to come together to deliver value, and that's where I think this framework that you laid out to look at ethics across the spectrum is very critical. Now we're running a little bit out of time, but let me bring it home for me. Right, what is some practical guidance or advice that you have for organizations who are looking to scale their AI journeys, and for those who haven't even started yet, so who are about to start their journeys? Give us some practical recommendations.
Yeah, I think for organizations of starting to think and are very early on in their journey, my advice was, don't make your first hire to be a data scientist. Make it to be somebody from within your organization. Train that person depending on where you want to bring in AI. Make that person AI literate, AI fluent, so that you have, start with a business problem you want to solve, and then focus on bringing in the technology component in. So I think starting with business problems is the best way to succeed with AI. For the companies that are ahead in their journey, I would say, focusing on this third stream that I was talking about, right? The risk, governance, ethical impacts. As you scale out, making sure ethics is embedded not only in your development process, but also in your ML ops process, because that software is continuously evolving and changing. So it is time to also think about the risks and address them proactively. You've gotten a lot of value from AI, but also think about how could things go wrong and address it today, as opposed to waiting for when it actually goes wrong and then mediate it.
And reacting to it. No, fascinating, Beena. What is one thing, Beena, you would like everybody in the industry, everybody in AI to be working on to solve right now?
Yeah, I really hope we move. beyond just value creation for organizations to also value creation for humanity. I think all the triggers are there, and I'm very hopeful that we're going to see more brain power being put into solving for some of the largest problems that we as humanity face, whether it's climate change and sustainability, human trafficking, solving for cancer, solving for poverty and world hunger. There are such big problems in front of us. Now that we've seen AI succeeding in companies, let's come together to solve for some of humanity's largest problems and figure it out. We can do it.
No, well, very well said, Beena. And I also think it's an incentive problem, right? We have to structure it in a way that you actually provide the right incentives for more and more innovators and entrepreneurs and companies to go focus on that.
Yeah,
Let me ask you, go
sorry,
ahead.
I
Sorry.
was just going to say that I'm certainly seeing more of that happening now than ever before, and whether it is COVID and pandemic which made us all pause and think, or things like climate change which we are dealing with today. But I'm very optimistic about it. I think there will be more incentives than ever before that direct us in that path.
Absolutely, absolutely. Beena, I have some quick rapid fire questions, if you will, right? So give me a story of how you will hope we will be interacting as humans with AI in, say, 10 years. I used to ask this question in 100 years, and it was too far out, and people were like, yeah, we're going to space, and,
Yeah.
in 10 years, how do you see the interaction?
I think, so for example, this conversation, I'm probably, if we were having it 10 years from now, I would probably be seeing a 3D image of you. It might feel more human. You might be talking in a completely different language, and I might be talking in a completely different language, but, without any delay, we will understand each other because AI is doing real time translation. AI is also nudging us and providing us, additional data points, right, which we don't have to necessarily keep in our memory, just like we don't remember our phone books anymore, right? It's all, I don't remember even my son's phone number. But if we would have all the data as the conversation is going on at our fingertips that I could share with you right away, and you would have it too. So I think AI truly augmenting us to have, conversation in different language, different context, and but AI enabling us to communicate better. And this is a very specific example just based on what we're doing right now.
No, awesome, awesome. Uh, I have a personal question for you. What is one personal practice that you do that keeps you at the top of your game?
Reading. I'm always in the middle of 3 to 5 different books at a time, and as you can see behind me, I read real physical books, but it helps me keep track of what I'm reading, but also I balance it between fictional and non-fictional and inspiring and light. So I'm always in the middle of reading different books and different perspectives, and I think that really helps me bring different perspectives to my game.
Give me a book recommendation. Anything, just
Oh my
fiction.
God, there's so many, I mean, depends on what you like. Like, I love reading crime fiction and thrillers. I also like reading biographies. I just finished reading Satya's book and I absolutely loved it. It was one of those, non-fiction books, which usually takes a long time, but I couldn't keep it down. So, Satya Nadella's biography, go read that. That's awesome.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I have, and I was actually when he launched it, I was there in Seattle in Redmond. There was a CIO or a CEO event, and I was part of one of the M12 portfolio companies. So I have an autographed copy of the Hit Refresh book from Satya Nadella. So, but
Now
it's a
I'm
fascinating.
jealous. Now I'm jealous, Ganesh.
Oh, that's awesome. No, thank you for that. How can the viewers and listeners get in touch with you on the internet?
So I am on most social media. If you Google my name, I know that I'm the only Beena Ammanath in the world. So there will not be any duplicate links that you get. So connect with me on Twitter and LinkedIn. I would love to engage with your audience.
That is awesome. Beena, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was a fascinating conversation. I really, really enjoyed it.
Ganesh, thank you so much for having me, and good luck with everything that you're doing.